But we start this hour as India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has landed in Moscow for a crucial three-day visit. Jaishankar will hold high-level talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Munterov. He's also set to co-chair the 26th session of the Intergovernmental Commission Trade and Economic Cooperation and address the India-Russia Business Forum. This diplomatic engagement comes just days after two phone calls between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin, their latest following Putin's meeting with US President Donald Trump in Alaska, where the ongoing Ukraine conflict was a key topic. The visit also follows a sharp escalation in US-India trade tensions, with Washington slapping 25% tariffs on Indian imports over New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil. Well, joining us to discuss the significance of this meeting and, of course, all of the topics that surround it, Dmitry Semez Jr., the head of Sputnik India, joining us live. Thank you ever so much, Dmitry, for taking the time to speak with us. Let's look at the significance of this meeting. Firstly, I detailed all of the talks that are set to take place. What do you expect to be the outcome of these bilateral talks?
Well, look, it's clear that this visit will have a business, trade heavy agenda. Even if we look at the fact at who sent the invitation, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Denis Munterov. Munterov has, for the better part of the last decade, been basically the Russian government's top guy when it's come to trade and industry. And you know, as you mentioned, there's also going to be the meeting of the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade. Dr. Jaishankar will be addressing the India-Russia Business Council. And I think that it's important to look at this because we've become accustomed to looking at Russia-India trade primarily through the context of weapons sales and more recently oil sales. But what we're seeing slowly but surely is ramping up of industrial cooperation, where, for example, the best known example of this is BrahMos, where you have Russian engineers and Indian engineers working together to produce a world-class supersonic missile. But this is starting to branch out in other areas like, machinery, like trains, like pharmaceuticals. So I think that on the top of the agenda is how we can increase this bilateral industrial cooperation. And obviously the second thing is a long-standing question, long-standing topic in Russia-India cooperation is how do we, manage some of the logistical issues? Because again, unlike China, there is quite a bit of geographic distance between Russia and India. So thinking of what are the most efficient but secure trade routes is definitely going to be on the top of the agenda, especially given the fact that, Iran, which is at the centerpiece of the international north-south transport corridor, has faced some geopolitical tension in recent years. I think that's going to be an important topic. And of course, easing ruble to rupee trade, because as you mentioned, these talks are taking amid growing threats from the White House, growing threats from the United States.
Yes.
And accordingly, both Russia and India have an urgent need to think about how to make their cooperation even more sanctions-proof than it currently is.
Absolutely, Dmitry. Let's build on that because, of course, we know that the 50% tariffs are set to be imposed on the 27th of August. Half of those tariff rates are coming because of India's purchase of Russian oil. Donald Trump so far only placing sanctions on India for purchasing Russian oil. And we heard from the White House overnight, they said that this was to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Diplomacy is still ongoing, but how significant are these tariffs and how will discussions over the next couple of days with Jaishankar and his counterpart Lavrov and other diplomats potentially shape future relations, not just with Russia and India relating to trade, but also potentially India-US relations amidst this uncertainty over tariff action?
From Russia's perspective, these tariffs are not about India's purchase of Russian oil, because as the Indian government itself pointed out, the European Union bilateral trade with Russia is greater than India's bilateral trade with Russia. And of course, I think everyone knows that China's purchase of Russian oil is greater than India's purchase of Russian oil. So why is then the United States going after India? Well, I think it's first important to note that this didn't even start under Donald Trump, because under his predecessor, Joe Biden, we saw the U.S. Department of Justice basically wage legal warfare against Gautam Adani. We saw also the Biden administration provide refuge to Khalistani terrorists. And we saw even there sort of, the first inkling of economic threats towards India. Now this hybrid economic warfare against India is going into turbo mode under the Trump administration, because as President Trump himself said, as his Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, has repeatedly said, for the United States, BRICS is the big problem, because they see in BRICS a potential financial economic coalition that can provide an alternative to the U.S.-led financial system. And if the U.S.-led financial system no longer has a monopoly on the global financial system, then that undercuts the very fabric of U.S. hegemony. And so, from Moscow's perspective, these attacks on India are not even about, trying to strong-arm Russia. They're about pursuing a divide-and-conquer strategy within BRICS. But I think to Russia's great relief, India has shown itself to be very resilient in the face of U.S. pressure, because obviously Washington was expecting that it would be easier to intimidate India rather than China, because India has long strived to preserve a good relationship with the United States, with other Western countries. But Prime Minister Modi is showing very clearly that India cannot be bullied around. And we, of course, attach great significance, symbolic significance, to the fact that Jaishankar is coming to Moscow, the fact that he is showing clearly that India will continue trading with Russia, India will continue strengthening its involvement in the multipolar world order. And I think that's, from Russia's perspective, an enormous sign of strength by India.
Yes, Dmitry, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us and provide insight. Of course, these upcoming meetings, we will be following them and bringing you all of those updates as they happen, looking at relations between Russia and India, but also the wider ramifications amidst talks surrounding conflict and global trade. But let's now move to the Middle East, where Israel's